Yes, so today is Wednesday, the 4th of November, and we are reviewing the gotcha menu settings. I call them the gotcha settings because there are caveats or gotchas that can get you into big trouble if you don't understand how they work. So we're going to start with the VirtualBox Manager settings. And this is part of our Module 2 study guide. We mention these things, and every time you see the word caveat, it means, hey, there's an exception here. You want to make sure that you understand what that means. So to walk through this first part, I wanted to share with you that if you're importing an appliance, oftentimes an appliance you can download off the internet is a much smaller file. It could be 3 or 4 gigabytes large. But when you import an appliance, it is a copy of a virtual machine that's designed to be implemented on other people's hardware, and the hard disk space can expand by as much as 20 gigabytes. So when you're importing an appliance, you want to understand how does the appliance set up the virtual machine. So what am I saying? If we clone a machine, or more importantly, we export it to OCI, we're creating an image of the virtual machine that other people can use. Usually, cloning a virtual machine is making an exact copy of it. It's like a photocopy machine for virtual machines. And if you want to put it out on the web so that thousands of people can use it, you want to shrink it down. You don't want the hard disk, the virtual hard disk, to be as big as it would when it's set up. So when you export it to OCI, what you're doing is converting it into an appliance. And again, after 3 or 4 gigabytes of download, people can import the appliance, and then the virtual hard disk expands however large the original virtual machine was, and that can be 20, 30 gigabytes of space. And why am I telling you this? If you find something online that says, hey, we have an appliance that works in VirtualBox Manager, and everything is set up for you to go, you want to read and make sure that you have enough hard disk space. So that's going to be a repeated caution. Another thing we want you to do is we always want you to check for updates manually. And that's because sometimes the automated update check doesn't always work. Are there any questions about importing, the cautions associated with importing an appliance?
No question.
Okay, thank you. The other gotcha on this VirtualBox Manager menu is preferences. You want to make sure, and we've mentioned this before, that the default machine folder is not in your documents where documents are stored in OneDrive. So that's the second menu option from the VirtualBox Manager level. By the way, the other thing I would tell you is that if you make any changes to menu settings here in your VirtualBox Manager, the menu settings here tend to impact all virtual machines, or can apply to all virtual machines on your system. Where if you're running the machine and you use the VM menus, the virtual machine menus, not the VirtualBox Manager menus, but the virtual machine menus, those menu settings affect only the running VirtualBox. But in preferences, you want to make sure that it's not pointed, your default machine folder is not pointed to the documents folder where documents are stored online in the cloud in OneDrive, okay? So actually, I guess there are 3 caveats. The preferences setting for the default storage, manually checking the updates because sometimes the automated thing doesn't work, and when you import the appliance, make sure you verify the amount of disk space that's required for the virtual hard disk. because the download size is not going to equal how much disk space it's going to set up on your laptop, on your host, when you import the appliance. Okay. Any questions?
No, no question.
Okay. So when you clone a machine, right now on this machine, let's talk about the machine menu and the caveats on the machine menu. In the machine menu, I have a default folder for my virtual machines. And this machine here, let's see, in this machine here, my virtual machine for server 2019 is 45 gigabytes. Let's see, how many gigs is it? It's 44 gigabytes large. So the virtual hard disk for my server 2019 virtual machine is 44 gigabytes. If I use clone, it's going to want to create an exact copy, including the 44 gig virtual hard disk. And I have a question for you, Aaron. Do I have 44 gigabytes of free disk space? Could I clone my machine?
It's not possible because your disk space is less. It's too small for it to be in it.
That is correct.
Yeah,
That's something to watch out for. That's a gotcha. It's a,
yeah.
you know, it's one of those things that gets you in trouble. So it's like a little gremlin pops up and says, gotcha, right? And we don't like gotcha. We want you to be able to use the menu options without painting yourself into a corner. So yeah, that's an important thing. That's why I checked to see how large my machine was before I cloned it. That's an important thing to understand. Okay. Now we're going to skip over the settings option here in machine because the moment I do this, I have my server 2019 machine highlighted. And if I click on settings, I'm going to end up opening up the same settings that are used to configure the virtual machine directly. And that's a separate thing we're going to get into now. So move. So sometimes when we clone a machine, what we really want to do is set up the clone in a new location or on a new system, and then we want to move the virtual machine over to another host system. So moving a virtual machine is the same as cloning the machine, copying it over on the new host, and then deleting the existing machine on the original host. So move can save a lot of space if you can connect to another host. You can move your virtual machine over there completely. It's not the same as cloning because when you clone, the clone of your virtual machine, when you start it up, is going to have a different MAC address. It's not going to have the same IP address. It's not going to have the same, it's going to be slightly different. The identity of the machine when it comes up is going to be different. So it's not going to have the same name. A clone will not have the same name. What do I mean? Here, the virtual machine is called PGBook VM 2020. If I clone this, the clone will have a name other than PGBook VM 2020. It might be PGBook VM 2020-1 or dash.
Also, the name changing, so you won't mix it up.
Correct. That's correct. But moving the machine transports the machine to a new place, and it's no longer listed here. It's on the other machine, and it has the exact same name and the exact same MAC address. What do I mean by MAC address? Well, I'm going to go ahead and use the Start menu. So I can start. Let's talk about Start. And actually, we'll work down the list. Group. I can get a group of virtual machines and I can start the whole group together, or I can move the whole group together, or I can clone the whole group. I can update the whole group. I can change settings in network. I can basically manage groups of virtual machines. That's a very useful feature. But it requires an awful lot of disk space. So when you're doing things with whole virtual machines, just remember whatever you're changing is being changed on all of the virtual machines, and wow, that could take up all sorts of disk space. Any questions about group before we move on?
No question.
Okay. I'm going to take the Server 2019 machine, and I'm going to go to the machine menu, and I'm going to use the start option called Detachable. I'm going to recommend that you always use this instead of normal. Why? Because detachable is going to allow the virtual machine to run even if your laptop switches users or someone logs out. The virtual machine continues to run. So in cases whenever you want to run a virtual machine, you would use Detachable Start. Now, why is this a caveat? Why is this one of the gotchas? Let's pretend that you share your laptop with someone in your family. Aaron, this would be true for one of the laptops. Won't you share one of your laptops with your dad or other family members?
Yeah, my sister.
Your sister. Good.
Yeah.
So let's say that you started your virtual machine detachable and you left your machine running and you logged out because your sister needed to use the laptop. And then she logged in and she says, "Hey, it's really slow, Aaron. What's going on?" "Oh, I have a virtual machine running and it has lots of RAM and it has lots of CPUs, and so it's slowing down the laptop, slowing down the host." Whenever you use detachable, if you share machines with other users, you want everyone to understand that the machine is still running, and if that causes a performance issue, you can manage that. Okay? So you would manage it by, if your sister came up to you and said, "Hey, I have a lot of really heavy work to do for biology and I need all of the laptop," you might just put your machine to sleep and park it. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Any questions about Detachable Start?
No question.
Okay, now here's one there should be a question about. Headless Start. Headless Start means you don't have a display, you don't use keyboards and mice. The machine starts, but it's understood that you'll connect to the machine with your own keyboard and display, and you don't need a virtual keyboard, a virtual mouse, or a virtual display. You would use this option if you had a virtual machine that was functioning like a server and you had a bunch of them as a group and you were sharing one keyboard, one mouse, and one screen, one display to connect to each of the machines, and you would just switch between views. It's not the kind of thing that's used very often, but if you select this option, you have to understand you're not going to be able to see the display. You're not going to be able to use the keyboard and the mouse. The machine will start, but you don't have any way to control it through the virtual menus. You have to connect to it remotely. So you need to set up the machine for remote access in a fashion where the system does not have its own display, it does not have its own keyboard, and it does not have its own mouse. And then you can connect to it with a headless start. I don't know if that makes sense, but you can configure a machine to not have any of that stuff and then get it running, and then you can connect to it with your own keyboard, your own mouse, and your own screen. But you have to know that's what it's doing. So if you try to connect to a virtual machine and there's no display, there's no keyboard or no mouse, it could be that somebody started it in headless mode, and you basically need to shut it down. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Any questions about the start menu options then?
No, no question.
Okay. If you share your laptop or your host with a lot of people and they need the whole laptop when they get on there, you would continue using normal start. You would save your virtual machine when you log out, and then it wouldn't be running when they log in. But if you need a virtual machine to continue running, even if the screensaver kicks in, even if you're logged out after so many minutes of inactivity, if you want your virtual machine to continue running, then you'd use Detachable Start. Okay. Tools. So in the Tools menu option, you can get details, or it can show you logs of what's going on. This is really important as a menu option because the logs can help you with troubleshooting. So if you have a case where something isn't working right, or if you just start your machine, you don't do anything with it, and all of a sudden there's lots of transmission going on, right? So received frames, the number of sent and received data from your virtual machine is huge. Sometimes checking your logs can really help. Do you have any questions about this option?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Nope.
Snapshots. So this is a good one if you want to roll back to snapshots. So what am I saying? You can take a snapshot of a machine, and that's like it's like it's like clone, except you don't have a full copy. You're taking a backup of the virtual machine when you take a snapshot. You can convert a snapshot into a clone. So a snapshot is like a clone, except that it only has the changes on the virtual machine. So I want you to think of snapshots as something like a clone, but it's not a full copy. It's only the things that have changed on your machine. Why did I jump forward to come back? If you go to the Tools option and Machine menu, and you look at snapshots, it'll tell you how many different snapshots you have of your machine. And if you're starting to run out of disk space, you can start a snapshot. So what am I saying? Let's pretend you do a snapshot and you ruin your machine after that. You can come to this screen, identify the previous snapshot, start it, and it's as if your actions never happened. What's the caveat? I have to have lots of drive disk space. If I were to take a snapshot of my machine now, it would be a full copy, just like a clone, 44 gigabytes. Could I take a full snapshot of my machine now? Nope.
Nope. Nope.
No, I couldn't. If I take a snapshot tomorrow, the new snapshot's only going to have the changes, which I could do. And I might be able to store snapshots on another disk. So that's one of the things that I want you to know about the Tools option when it comes to snapshots. You can do a lot with the snapshots, and you can store them or move them or clone them, and you could connect an external hard disk, and that's one way of working around your disk limitations. But you have to understand that whenever you're using these options for snapshots, it's taking up lots and lots of memory, lots of disk space. Any questions about the machine menu in VirtualBox Manager?
No question.
Okay, so let's look a little closer at snapshots, right? If we look at the properties of snapshots, I have a current state, and that's the only, if I hold my pointer over it, it says, hey, it was powered off at 12:06 today, right? So I can get I can pretty much tell when it was running last. I can change the settings of a snapshot, which includes the same kind of settings for the virtual machine. So why does this matter? You could have a snapshot or the current state of the virtual machine, take a snapshot, change settings, run the snapshot. If it blows up, you can delete the snapshot. So it does help to have extra disk space. If you take a snapshot, you want to be sure you have enough disk space. And the first time you take one, it's just like a clone. It's taking a full copy. It's a backup. And then as you make changes to the machines, you can go back to previous snapshots. So how is that better than clone? Well, as I said before, if you make changes tomorrow, then make changes on Friday, make changes on Saturday, make changes on Sunday, and then all of a sudden you find out something isn't working, you can go back to that snapshot, back to that snapshot, back to that previous snapshot until your stuff is working. And then you know what happened, or you have a better idea of what happened. Oh, on Friday, I downloaded that stuff off the network, off the internet, and now everything went boom. So you can go back to the Thursday snapshot and everything is good. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Just remember, you got to have lots of disks, lots of disk space, lots and lots of disk space. All right, so you can use your right mouse button to do the same thing the buttons are here. I can take a snapshot or clone it. I can take a snapshot and then clone the snapshot and return. Now I have a whole new virtual machine that was in a certain state. Just every time you do that, it's huge. You're taking up huge amounts of disk space. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start my standard machine, my standard server machine in Detachable. And what we're going to do now is review the VM settings, the VM menus. One nice thing about running your virtual machines is that you don't use the VirtualBox Manager. You don't have to use, this doesn't have to be open while you're running your virtual machine. So I'm going to close VirtualBox, the application, the manager, because I don't really need to take up memory and CPU activity while I'm running the machine. I have my own set of menus. But once again, these menus only affect my own machine, the one virtual machine. They do not affect everybody else. So one of the most important things I want you to remember, Aaron, is that the VirtualBox menus can affect all of the virtual machines, and I have more than one. But the VM menus only affect the one machine. Okay. So now let's review the virtual machine menus, which are not the same as the VirtualBox menus. Now the title is a little confusing because they almost look the same. Just remember that the VM menus, when you see, well, either way, when VirtualBox Manager is open, the VirtualBox Manager menus are running for all of the they affect all of the virtual machines, but the VM menus only affect the one machine. So here you can set preferences for the one machine. And actually what this does is it opens up the VirtualBox preferences in the manager window. So that can be kind of confusing. Just remember that you're setting preferences for all VirtualBox machines. And that would be the one exception to what I've just mentioned. All these other menus affect only this virtual machine, but this menu affects all virtual machines. So what am I saying? This one preferences option off the file menu is actually the VirtualBox Manager preferences, which apply to all virtual machines. The Network Operations Manager, that can also affect all of the virtual machines if the network changes you are making. It depends on the network changes that you're doing. So this one could be either or. It could affect all your virtual machines or just the one virtual machine, depending on the settings that you change there. Reset all warnings. If you cancel warnings for VMs as they're running, and you'd like the warnings back, you can use this option to reset the warnings so that when it's inactive or there's a problem, those warnings will pop up again. Any questions about the file menu and how it's different for VM menus?
No question.
Okay. The machine menu, settings. So we've seen this before. So this helps you configure the virtual machine and all the hardware components inside the virtual machine. And that's pretty self-explanatory. In your assignment, you were directed to change the setting for the network adapter because sometimes a virtual machine can connect to the local network of the host without any problems at all. And the default setting for that machine is NAT. In most cases, you want to use bridged adapter if you want your virtual machine to appear to be one of the other devices in your home. What am I saying? Right now, I'm using wireless. Aaron, are you using wireless on your laptop?
Yes, wireless.
Yes. Now, if you start your VM and it's in bridged adapter mode, other people using the wireless in your house can see your virtual machine on the network because your VM network is bridged into your wireless network. That's what bridged means. If you use bridged, it means your VM network is connected. Your VM, your virtual machine, is connected to the physical machines that are using your home wireless. If you want your virtual machine to be seen by your home wireless devices, then you would want to use bridged adapter. Let's say that you want to do your virtual machine, you want to operate your virtual machine in a manner, and you don't want your home wireless users to know the virtual machine is there. If you want to hide your virtual machine on the network so that it's not seen by the physical wireless users in your house on your home wireless, your home Wi-Fi, then you would choose NAT. But this creates its own caveat. This creates its own problem. Your wireless access point is doing NAT already. In other words, when you use your internet service for your wireless adapter at your house, your wireless router is taking the public internet service network address and it's translating it to an inside network address, something like 192.168, a private internal address. That's network address translation. That's already happening with your wireless on the home level. If you want to hide your virtual machine from other wireless users in your house and you choose NAT, your wireless adapter, your wireless router is already doing NAT. Now your virtual machine is doing NAT. So it's double natted. Double natting means that it's being translated from the public into the private network address and then from there into a second private network address. There are some games or there's other network applications that you might want to run on your virtual machine that don't play nice when things are double natted. So one of the caveats or exceptions that you want to understand about using this setting for your machine setting for your network interface is that if you're using wireless instead of connecting with a cord, then you could have a double natted situation. Do you have any questions about using this?
No question.
I would recommend that unless you have a special reason to use NAT, I would always manually assign bridged adapter.
So you're saying it's less safer than using the bridge?
NAT is safer than using bridged for your virtual machine because it isolates your virtual machine from your other home users. And if you don't want other home users to interact with your virtual machine, it's safer. But it also means that your virtual machine could have double natting. And when it's trying to be, if you're trying to use it to play games or you're trying to use it for other things on the internet, some network services don't work well when it's double natted. So the short answer to your question is yes, it's safer, but in general, it's safer inside your home wireless environment anyway. So the real question you need to ask with your virtual machine is, do you want other home users to see your virtual machine? You can create a virtual machine that runs on your laptop that cleans up the ads when you're watching YouTube, and it blocks pop-ups when people are browsing the web. And so it makes everybody's web browsing faster. It's called Pi-hole. It's really cool. So you can run Pi-hole on a virtual machine, and you can use bridged adapter mode to run the internet service connection through the Pi-hole first, and then let everybody else get on the internet. And in that case, you would deliberately want everybody else to see your virtual machine because it's doing something good for all your other users. Does that help explain a little better?
Yep.
Ordinarily, you would want to use bridged. Unless you're doing something really special on that virtual machine, you don't want anybody to see. In which case, you got to remember about the double natting. Any questions about this?
No question.
Okay, let's look at audio. This is a setting that's often overlooked. Many times people have a virtual machine and they want to watch videos safely, and they'll take a snapshot. And if it blows up on the internet, then they just go back to the previous snapshot and they haven't lost anything. But in order for the viewing, to watch streaming media, if you want to use a virtual machine for an entertainment system, you'd have to enable the audio input and output. And a lot of times people don't realize, but this is unchecked by default. So that's a setting that most people forget. Another thing that happens is that people have to adjust which level of USB connection their virtual machine can use. This is grayed out because the machine is running right now. You can only change some settings when the machine is not running. But I could say, okay, I have an old printer. It has an old USB cable. I plug it in. My virtual machine doesn't see it. My virtual machine can't print to my printer. So you change from here, the newer version of USB to the older version of USB. And now when your printer is plugged in, the virtual machine can see it and use it. Any questions about VM machine settings?
No question.
Okay. Now, the other thing that's available on the machine menu is that you can take a snapshot of the machine from the machine menu. So you don't have to have VirtualBox Manager running in order to access the snapshot option. Just remember, if you go into the snapshot option, what is it you cannot do? What should you look out for if you use a snapshot? What should you always check before you take a snapshot?
Your disk space.
Excellent. Thank you. You must always check your disk space. Okay, session information. Now this is really cool. A lot of times people are just on this default tab and they think, oh, well, I've seen that before. That's That's on the same screen I see in the VirtualBox Manager window before I start my machine. And then afterwards, it shows this kind of stuff. But the tab that's often overlooked is runtime information. Runtime information will give you additional information about the status of your running machine. And sometimes you can find some things like, okay, can I copy and paste between machines? This says, well, bidirectional is active. So I can tell if it's running. If I try to drag something from here into my virtual machine and it doesn't work, see the red circle? Do you see the red circle?
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, the red circle, if I try to drag this from my host desktop into my virtual machine, it's not allowed. So there's something else going on there, right? This is one place I could check to see if my drag and drop mode is enabled. Is it one way? I can only drag from my virtual machine out onto my host, or I can only drag from my host into my virtual machine. It can be one directional or bidirectional. This is important to understand. So if you want to know what's happening with my virtual machine, it's really slow. Is the CPU overloaded? Now, this is really important. And again, it has to do with session information, and it's a tab that people don't really check. But let's say that most of the time my CPU looks like this right here. If I go to my settings, and I look at my machine's settings on the system, and I look at my processors, how many CPUs am I using?
4 CPUs.
I can use 4 CPUs, but what is my setting?
This is one. One is one.
It's 1. So if I'm looking at this and I'm seeing this, well, all right, so I'm going to cancel out of here and I look at my machine session information. If I see that the CPU is always loaded and it's redlined, it's always maxed out, I can shut my machine down. I can go into my settings. I can go to my system processor and I can increase it from 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 or 1 to 4. I can max it out. When that happens, now that I'm looking at my performance load, I would see something like this, right? So a lot of times people have problems with a virtual machine that's not running well, and they never check the performance monitor tab, which is a shame. So look at all this great stuff. Disk input output rates, network rate, RAM usage, right? And CPU. I can adjust my settings to put more RAM or more CPU cores to work if I need to. And then there's guest control. So I'm not really sure what this does, but I think there's more information here when a session or process crashes. So if you have problems controlling your guest virtual machine, you're likely to see more information here. And again, that's just a guess. Any questions about session information?
No, no question.
Okay. So moving right along, this next one. If I want to isolate my virtual machine from the local network, I put it in NAT, but I also turn off drag and drop and clipboard. I turn off shared folders. I can still use File Manager to move files. What am I saying? I have a running machine right now, and on my C drive, I can take a file from my host machine. Let's create a file here. I'm going to create one called Punch Buggy. You see this file?
Yes, in it.
It says you forgot the Y on the file name, right? Okay, so I misspelled it before. I put that, oh, it must have been corrected. So I'm going to say, oh, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. This file is sitting on my temp folder on my host machine. And let's pretend I want to put it on my desktop, on my guest machine. And let's pretend that I don't have shared folders enabled. I don't have USBs enabled. I don't have a USB thumb drive I can use to transfer, where I copy it first onto my thumb drive on the host machine and then connect it again and on the virtual machine and copy and paste it down, right? I can't drag and drop between windows. I can't do anything, right? I mean, because I could probably just do this. I mean, couldn't I just do this? Well, it's saying it can't. That could be because I'm not logged in. Let me log in and see if that helps.
Well,
So before I'm logged in, my virtual machine is waiting for a login and it's not going to let me do stuff. But let's see if I can drag and drop from my host machine here into my virtual machine on the desktop. Nope, not really. Oh, that's a problem. Because I want to be able to copy something from here into there. And I have drag and drop turned on. If I look at my machine menu here, if I look at the system and I look at, no, if I look at general and I look at advanced, I have drag and drop in bidirectional. It's not just from host to guest or from guest to host. It's bidirectional. And it's not disabled, it's enabled, bidirectional. I should be able to drag that and drop that. So what's going on, right? Well, a lot of times you want to really isolate virtual machines from other machines. And yet you still need things to work. So, and you see right here, it says I need updates, right? So remember in your study guide, one of the first things we talk about are how you have to constantly update your host machine, the VirtualBox application manager, and then the VM stuff itself, and then the extension packs, and the guest editions and all that. That's just a review. But anyway, all right, let's say I have Punch Buggy and it's in the temp folder and I want to put it in here. If I open up my file manager, this should give me the root of the C drive on my host system. And if I double click, I should be able to go into users and then go into T Christian. Oh, no, let's do this. I'm going to go back to C drive. I'll put it in the temp folder. There's Punch Buggy. Do you see that?
I see it.
Okay. Do you see the username and password?
Nope.
See right here where it says username and password? Here's my point. I'm in File Manager on the machine menu, and I've identified the file that I want to put in here. But in order to do that, I have to create a guest session by connecting to my guest virtual machine. And I have to use a login and password. Do you see right here where it says username?
Yep.
So I'm going to put in a username, in this case, administrator. I'm going to put in the password. Actually, okay. Now I'm going to create the guest session. Now it's giving me the C drive, the D drive, and the Z drive on my host machine. I'm going to go into the C drive. I'm going to go into users. I'm going to go into the administrator. I'm going to go into the desktop. See punch buggy? I'm going to move it over here into the desktop, which is right here. Ah! Did you see it?
I see it.
I've closed. So even though the drag and drop didn't work, even though my other clipboard stuff, I can't copy and paste, right? If I want to copy, can I paste? Can I click into here and then paste? Nope, paste is grayed out. I can't copy and paste between virtual machine and host machine. I can't drag and drop. I tried that. It's not letting me. Although now that I have a session open, it's letting me. That's kind of weird. Okay. I can use the file manager to move files back and forth between the host to the guest and the guest to the host. Any questions about the file manager option?
Yeah, that part was the most interesting part I find. The drag and drop.
Yes. And so this is a very useful thing. Just remember that you have to keep in mind, is the file you're dragging onto the virtual machine, is it too big for the hard drive, the virtual hard drive? Or is the file you're dragging from the virtual machine too big for your host? You're making an extra copy of that machine or that file. You're actually making an extra copy of that file. So if you're dragging a big file, it's going to take up more space wherever you're moving it, right? Okay. So let's look at the rest of these, and then we're going to stop for the day. And then on Monday, we're going to cover view, input, and devices, and help, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So machine, pause. If I hit pause, all I'm doing is freezing the machine. That means that it's not loaded in memory. I'm just hitting the pause button. So if something goes crazy and it starts tearing up my virtual machine, one of the first things I can do is just hit pause. Now that's not the same as putting it to sleep. True or false, when you close your laptop lid, even though you're in the middle of a screen, your laptop goes to sleep or it hibernates.
That's true.
That's true. It writes a copy of whatever you have open in the windows, whatever's running on the screen, it saves a copy and it stores it on the hard disk. And then when you open the lid, if you log in, your stuff is right where you left it.
It come back to the screen.
It comes back, yeah. This is kind of like that, except all it's really doing is, it's like hitting the pause on a movie. It's not making an extra copy. So if you close this machine and there's something you need to save, it's going
It's a loss.
you can
It's a lose.
Yes. That's an important caveat with understanding how pause works. If I want to unpause, all I have to do is select pause again, and now it's active. So if I close it now and it says, hey, do you want to sleep this or save this? Then the changes would be saved. But if I do this first and then close it and say, no, I don't want to save anything, I could lose everything. Yeah. Good catch. I'm glad you knew that. What about reset? What does reset do? Well, I just copied Punch Buggy on the desktop, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. If I reset this machine, do I lose Punch Buggy? What's reset like? Reset is called a warm reboot. It's like pressing Control-Alt-Delete on your keyboard and restarting your system. Or have you ever had a computer where it has a power button and then it has a reset button? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Not quite.
Okay. Have you ever had a PC instead of a laptop? No?
Yeah, I once had one.
Okay, watch this.
I know what you're talking about.
So a reset button on the front panel.
Oh, I remember. On the monitor.
Yeah, so let's say that you, well, not the monitor power button,
On.
but let's say that you have, let's say that you have a PC and it has two buttons instead of one. This one only has one, so there's no reset button on this one. But this one has a power button, and if you press this and hold it for 4 seconds, it turns it off. It's, whether you shut down nicely or not, it's the screen just goes dark, right? But this one, when you hit it, if you just press it, it breaks the power so that your system recycles. And what we're going to do now is we're going to use reset here. It's like hitting the reset button, a physical reset button. It's not the same as powering it off, but because powering it off turns off the power and then the circuits get cool and there's no electricity. Reset keeps the electricity going, keeps the circuits lit, keeps the electricity flowing, but it empties the memory, it empties the CPU, and it reboots your system. You can use the reset. If your system becomes unresponsive, you can use reset, and I'm going to do that now. Now remember, if you hit reset, anything you have open, you haven't saved, you can lose. So it's like pause in that sense. Let's talk about detach the GUI. Well, I'm not going to talk about that right now. I'm going to skip that. ACPI shutdown. If you select ACPI shutdown, that's the same as doing this. I want to shut down. So restart is like reset. Shutdown is like issuing an ACPI shutdown. Now, what's an ACPI shutdown? ACPI is a signal that tells the operating system and your computer, hey, I'm going to shut you down to power you off, but I want to do it gracefully. If you take a power button and you press it in and hold it for 1 second, usually it says, hey, do you want to power down your system? It doesn't just power down your system when you press and hold it for 1 second and then let up. If you answer yes, I want to power it off or I want to reset it, then that ACPI signal resets or restarts your computer. So an ACPI signal is a signal that tells your virtual machine, hey, I want to shut down gracefully. I want to do it in an orderly fashion. If I do this instead, where I press and hold the power button for 4 seconds, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, the screen goes black and the power stops, as if I jerked the power cord out of the wall or pulled the battery out of the laptop. Screen goes black. That is not a graceful shutdown. There is no ACPI signal. There's no trigger that says, hey, do you want to shut down gracefully? So what am I saying? Issuing this shutdown is like using this ACPI shutdown. Now, when you're running server, it doesn't pay attention to that signal. When you're running Windows 10 or Linux, it does. That's a caveat of this option. When you select ACPI shutdown because you want to do something graceful, if I log out of this and I sign out, are you with me, Aaron? Okay. And let's say that I haven't logged in and I go ACPI shutdown. It's not shutting down because it's a server. I'm running 2019 server. Servers usually support lots of users. When you're on the internet and you're using an Amazon screen, you're running on an Amazon server. Would it be good if one user could tell this Amazon server to shut down? What do you think?
No.
It would not. Amazon would not be happy. The reason we have server operating systems is because they don't shut off just to shut off. You have to go through a special process to shut them down on purpose. If I log in and I'm logged in with an administrative prompt, and then I issue the ACPI shutdown. So I'm logged in with a privileged account. I have administrative authority. And now I go to the machine menu and I issue the ACPI shutdown. On many machines, on many server machines, it will say, okay, so you want to shut down. In Windows 10, it'll say, oh, I see you did I see you pressed your power button for a second, just for a second. Do you want to shut down? In server, it doesn't do that either, right? But reset does. Do you really want to reset this thing? So reset is like saying, okay, press the power button or press the reset button. You know, break the power just for a second. Leave the power running, but empty the RAM, empty the CPU, and reboot my system. If I hit reset, oh, now it, so if I have a system that's unresponsive and I can't get it to stop, I can't get it to slow down, I can't get it to quit, I can use reset, but I can't save anything that's still open. If I can shut down gracefully, I want to use the ACPI shutdown, but the best way to do that is to use the menu option to shut down manually inside the operating system. That is the best way to do that. Now that is the last thing I wanted to show you on the machine menu, but I also wanted to show you this is a very important session. Your student learning objective D is how do you get control of a screen? How do you gracefully halt a virtual machine activity? So when you have a runaway virtual machine, how do you halt the machine activity? If we look at C here, I'm looking for the blue headers. C. This is how you shut down a virtual machine gracefully, the right way. You can use pause. If your host machine is slow or unresponsive, you can just pause your virtual machine for a second. And then when you're done on your host machine with your laptop, you can unpause it. Okay, you can save it. You can use a regular shutdown from inside the virtual machine. You can use ACPI shutdown. You can, let's see, I think this is supposed to be, oh, this is going to be C. That's a sentence that's supposed to be together. My bad. So I'm going to save as B, C. Right, so this is like shutdown using run as administrator. That's the ACPI, right? This is something that helps if you're having issues. You should check the log. Sometimes there's useful insight, right? So you got to remember to check the logs. If things aren't working like they're supposed to, things get locked up, check the log. After you try this, if this doesn't work. The next step is to use reset. The next step is to power off the virtual machine. That's like jerking the power cord out of it. How do you do that? You do this. It says, hey, it gives you these options, right? Save the machine state, send the shutdown signal. That's the same as ACPI shutdown. Do I want to send the signal? If I want to power it off, I'm pulling the cord. Boom. That's like jerking it out of the wall, jerking the power cord out of the wall. It's not a temporary reset. It's not a warm reset. It's a cold reset. Now, what happens if all this fails? Well, then you can do other things on your host machine. See, on your host machine, you can go into Task Manager and you can find the virtual machine that's running and you can shut it off with your Task Manager. We'll review more of that on Monday, okay?
Yeah.
Did you have any questions? Before?
I don't have more questions.
Okay. Well, this concludes our session for today. We'll see you Monday, and keep your eyes peeled for assignments, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing then. Let's see. I'm going to do Control H. There we go.